Yirmiyahu was a prophet, was a good chaver of mine. Never understood a single word he said, but we helped him to drink his yain. And we always have some mighty fine yain. Singing simchat le'olam, kol ha'yeladim now. Simchat to the dagim in the deep blue sea. Simchat to you and me. Yeah.
Welcome to the Haftarah Plethora video podcast, where we might not bring joy to the world, but we do talk about prophets like Jeremiah, Isaiah, Amos, Zechariah, and even far out psychedelic stoners.
Far out psychedelic stoners? Are you kidding?
I'm talking about Ezekiel. I mean, that cat had vision, or should I say visions. Zeke was a trippin prophet.
You're talking about one of our sacred prophets here. Show a little respect.
Rick, I have all the respect in the world for Ezekiel and for our sages for including so much of his prophecy as part of our Haftarah cycle. In fact, we read from the book of Ezekiel on 10 different occasions during the year, but more on that in just a bit. I'm Larry Herman, sipping some very fine wine, which I'm sure our good friend Zeke did just as well, and talking Haftarah with my very good chaver, the king of cannellation, Rick Muller. How you doing, Rick?
I'm doing fine, and I have my water. And I was okay until you started dissing one of our great prophets.
I meant no disrespect, Rick. In fact, I think that the passages that we read from Ezekiel are some of the most interesting and colorful of all the prophetic readings that we chant as Haftarot. But as far as Ezekiel being an interesting character, I only have to quote from Robert Alter, translator and commentator of the Tanakh, who writes, Ezekiel is surely the strangest of all the prophets. Alter goes on to say that our friend Zeke was given to ecstatic states, paranormal experiences, and even transgressing the borders of sanity. How's that? Ezekiel's visions of chariots, wheels, and bones are all well known in song, prayer, and theology.
All true, but it also makes for some very fine Haftarah chanting, which I'm looking forward to doing soon.
Yes, it does, and yes, you will. But first, let me give a bit of background. For today's Haftarah, we read from the second half of chapter 37 of Ezekiel. But did you know that we read the first half on the Shabbat of Pesach?
I do, and I even know what it's about. It's the famous story of the bones in the valley. Like you said, made famous in song.
Ezekiel connected them, dry bones. Now I hear the word of the Lord. Them bones, gonna rise again.
Not exactly Haftarah trope.
Nope. But I don't think it's possible to understand this week's Haftarah without some understanding of what came before. We all know that the bones rise and are reassembled, covered with sinew and flesh, and then filled with breath. But what do the bones represent?
Generations past?
Not only the generations past, but as Ezekiel quotes God in verse 11, man, these bones are all the house of Israel. They say, our bones are dry and our hope is lost. We have been cut off. And later in verse 14, God says, I will set you on your soil.
Okay, but what's this got to do with this week's Haftarah, which begins with verse 15, page 291 in the Eitz Chaim Chumash?
Well, it has two things to do with this week's Haftarah. One is the narrative, and the other is the symbol or an image. In terms of narrative, Ezekiel tells us in our reading this week that the only way the people can reach their soil from which they've been exiled, first in the dispersal of the 10 tribes of the kingdom of Israel, the northern tribe, which was conquered by the Assyrians in the 8th century, and then by the defeat and exile of the remaining tribes at the hands of the Babylonians more than a century later, is by coming together as one people. Unity is the theme of this narrative.
And the symbol?
Well, the symbols in the Valley of the Bones were bones, bones clattering. And this week, the symbols are the sticks or rods on which Ezekiel is instructed to write the names of both kingdoms and then put them together in a single stick. Like the bones coming together to form the individuals who will serve God, here the sticks represent the coming together of the different polities. As we read in verse 22, I will make them a single nation in the land, on the hills of Israel, and one king shall be king of them all. Never again shall they be two nations, and never again shall they be divided into two kingdoms. I think that there's a message here for our time, but that's for another time and place. Rick, do you think that you can jump off of that with your trope drash? I noticed that there's an abundance of interesting trope and trope combinations in this week's Haftarah.
Yeah, I'll give it a go. So what I wanted to highlight are the Kadmavia's laws today. Verse 17, if you could pull that up on the share screen, sir. The
All right, just give me one sec. Whoop, not there.
The Kadmavia's law at the beginning of verse 17. It looks like two curves facing each other. If you can see my hands, it goes.
We're almost there.
Kadmavia's law, or the two trope. They're two curves. So here the words will be Vikarav Otam. Okay, the two curves facing each other. Very good. Verse 17.
Right, but you see them. There they are.
Yes, there they are. And then again, it repeats later on. We'll get to that. But what strikes me about that, what I remember, are the two curves in another piece of Tanakh, in Exodus, in Truma, in chapter 25, verse 20, and it's on page 489 in the Chumash. Porsei chenafayim, in the Torah trope, which is major. Haftarah trope is minor, but it's the same two trope. The Kadmavia's law facing each other. Porsei chenafayim, over there, where the two wings of the Keruvim are facing each other. And the English there I really like. The commentary on the bottom of page 489, the verse 20. The Keruvim confront one another, even as a religious person must always be connected to other people and may never turn away from them to be concerned only with God. So in this case, like the priests have to be with the congregation, and they can't be hermits. They have to work together. It's not an onomatopoeia where the word sounds like what it's talking about. I like to coin the phrase, it's a tropamanapia, where the trope looks like the words that they're talking about. So
I like that a lot.
Thank you. So the porsei chenafayim, the two wings, they're touching, they're looking, they're facing each other, and then go back to our Haftarah, the karav otam, the two sticks Ezekiel will bring towards each other. And then on top of that, the next trope, where you have the darga echad, which looks like a Z underneath echad, and then el echad comes back up as the tavir. Let me get in minor again. The karavotam is the kadmavia's la echad el echad. So it's a point, counterpoint, yin yang maybe, but it's the same thing, the two sticks, but they have to come together to be strong. They have to unite, like the tribes of Israel and the tribes of Judah. So I really liked all that imagery there.
That's great. I think I got to work on the screen sharing a bit better.
That's okay. We all got something. And then it's going to repeat again in verse 20 when we get there. The two kadmavia's law, the trees, the sticks will come together, and he's going to ride on them. So it's the same kind of trope down there.
V'hayu ha'itzim.
Yes. And then asher tichtov alehem is the darga tavir. And again, it's point, counterpoint, the two pieces together forming a union.
You know, Rick, as you know, I really like the Kadmavia's law, but I've never told you how much I also like the darga and the tavir together. And you really highlighted that those form a pair. And I like the way in which you describe how they visually, at least for the Kadma V'Azla, visually sort of piece things together. And for me, the Dargah and Tevir, in terms of the rising and then falling on the Dargah, but it starts off really high and I always thought of it like a waterfall, and then sort of smoothing out with the Tevir.
Well, it's the pool at the bottom where the waters go down, but they come back up.
I love the fact that you like that. Well, Rick, I think it's time for us to start the chant.
Okay.
The Haftarah, and I think we're going to divide the Haftarah today into 3 parts. We're going to start off by doing verses 15 through 17, the first 3 verses, where we have the description of the 2 sticks or the rods and what they represent. And then we go to verse 18 through 22, those next 5 verses, which describe the promise of the return from exile for the people, both kingdoms together if they will be united. And then we close verses 23 through 28, which describes the new covenant and the sanctuary, the Mikdash, if only the people will return, united together in brotherhood, following the way of God. So Rick, why don't you start with the blessing and take it away.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu al la'asok b'divrei Torah.
Amen.
Vayihi devar Adonai elai lemor, ve'ata ben Adam, kach lecha etz echad, uchtov alav lihuda, v'livnei Yisrael chaverav, ulkach etz echad, uchtov alav liosef etz Ephraim, v'chol beit Yisrael chaverav, v'karav otam echad el echad, lecha le'etz echad, v'hayu lachadim biyadecha.
Fantastic introduction. So Rick, in these next 5 verses, what are the trope highlights in terms of interpreting the meaning of the verses?
Okay, well, the rarity of the Zarka and the Segol, it's on our hit list of rare trope. Here, it's announcing God's word. The prophets like to do this a lot with Munach, with a Revia sometimes. But here you have Zarka in verse 19. So on top of Koamar, you have that little squiggle, looks like an S, looks like a snake. And then Adonai Elohim has the Segol, which is the 3 dots on top. So that's an announcement. It's like the town crier. It's like, hey, wake up. So verse 19 is like that, and then verse 21 is like that. And both of them are introduced with a Revia, Daber Alehem. So that's also part of the announcement. Those
And they're identical.
Yes, those are. And then in between, verse 20, again, the Kadma V'Azla and the Hayu Ha'etzim, the 2 sticks facing each other. Asher Tichto, that you're going to write Alehem on them. So those are the highlights there. And then in 22, you have Umelech, the one king, Echad. That definitely, the Dargat Severe there also makes those words stand out.
Absolutely. Melech Echad, that's an intrinsic and important part of it. You know, Rick, I noticed one other thing that we hadn't talked about, and that is the word otam repeats several times. In verse 19, we have it as part of a kadma va'azla combination. V'natati otam alav.
On them.
Well, the truth is that most of the translations don't translate the otam in the plural. So basically, it's a little confusing, and we won't go into detail here.
On it, like they're already together, so it's a singular, yeah?
Well, or like it's talking about one of the sticks first, because I put it on top on the eighth Yehudah.
Yeah.
But in any case, I noticed that the otam there has a vav, but the otam in verse 22, which has the talisha gadola, which I now can differentiate from a talisha ketana, thanks to you.
How you lean.
There you go. it leans to the right, and more
Yeah, and there's
people are
and there's no
right-handed than
vav there.
left-handed.
Yes, yes.
Anyways, that one doesn't have the vav in the otam.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm putting you on the spot right now. I don't have a clue as to why there would be a vav or not be a vav.
Don't know. Don't know. You could say the stick is missing. It's gone on to better things because it's so happy. I don't know. But
The them has become one them united.
yes, I suppose.
I like that. So with that, why don't we pick up with verse 18?
B'chasher yomru elecha b'nei amcha lemor halo tagid lanu ma'ele lach daber alehem ko amar Adonai Elohim hine ani lokeach et etz Yosef Asher biad Ephraim v'shivtei Yisrael chaverav v'natati otam alav et etz Yehuda v'asitim li'etz echad v'hayu echad biadi v'hayu haitzim Asher tichtov alehem beyadcha leinehem v'daber alehem ko amar Adonai Elohim hine ani lokeach et bnei Yisrael mi bein hagoyim Asher halchu sham v'kibatzti otam misaviv v'eveti otam el admatam v'asiti otam legoy echad ba'aretz b'harei Yisrael umelech echad Yiyel chulam lemelech velo yiyu od lishnei goyim velo yechatsu od lishtei mamlachot od.
So now we have, at least in the prophecy, the people to be reunited under one king. They've been gathered together, and they shall no more be divided into two kingdoms. And then what's going to happen then? What's the next thing? So in those last 5 verses, what do you got for us in terms of the trope?
Well, the high note on the dargah on verse 23 right at the beginning, velo and no. It's like, don't do this. So that should grab everybody's attention. Don't do what? It's like when you say no to a room full of kids. They know they've done something, but they don't know what yet. And then it lists the different things that they shouldn't do anymore, is what hits me there. And then again, the pazer coming up in verse 25, v'yashvu aleha, that's the rarest trope. It's you shall live in the land. So that's the dream. That's the highlight. That's the hope. Is that we can live there, so I could say that about that, and then more dargat tavirs at the end, where biyot mikdashi, you shall be my mikdash, my tabernacle, my presence again. It's all connected like that.
So, Rick, I understand the Venatati et Mikdashi. I'm going to give my sanctuary. I understand the drama of that one and repeat it again, as you said, Biot Mikdashi, about the sanctuary.
Yes.
I'm going to ask you a little question about that combination with the Pazer, which basically starts off in the phrase after the Etnachta, V'yashvu.
In verse 25, yeah.
Verse 25, V'yashvu, they will dwell aleha, that's where the pazer is,
Yeah.
And then we've got this Tlisha Gdola under Hema.
Hema, there. Yeah. Is it they or there?
Okay, so that's what I'm
Haim is
wondering. And I
they.
guess we need a.
Hema is they.
I think so too. I think it's they.
But
and
it's
I don't know why
towards
it's not just-
they. It's towards they because of the hey on the end, right? Like Artsah isn't different from Eretz. Artsah means to the land. So Haim is they, Uvnehem and their children. Hema, I would think would be towards them, but that's just a minor point there.
But it's interesting that word there, and then we get to the children, the children's children. One last note, way back in verse 23, I'm surprised that you didn't mention it. I know a trope that's one of your favorites is Zakef Gadol on Ve'ani.
Yeah, but I.
And the I here is God, right?
Yes. Well, God's always a highlight. Whoever put the trope there wanted to put Va'ani with the Zakef Gadol, yeah?
And so is your chanting always a highlight. So why don't you take us home with the last 5 verses?
Velo Yitamu od Begilu lehem Ushikut sehem Uvechol pishehem Vehoshati otam no vav there Mikol moshvotehem Asher chatu vahem V'tiharti otam there's a vav V'hayuli leham Va'ani eye lahem lelohim. I think sometimes you have a vav and sometimes you don't. Ve'avdi David melech alehem v'roeh echad yiyeh lechulam uvmishpatah yelechu v'chukotai yishmeru ve'asu otam v'yashvu al haaretz Asher natati leavdi liyaakov Asher yashvu vach avotechem v'yashvu aleha hema uvnehem adolam David Avdi Nasi Lahem Leolam Becharati Lahem Berit Shalom Berit Olam Yiyeh Otam Untatim Behir Beti Otam Venatati Et Mikdashi Betocham Leolam V'haya Mishkani Alehem V'hayiti Lahem Lelohim V'hema Yiyuli Le'am V'yad'u Hagoyim Ki Ani Adonai Mekadesh Et Yisrael Biyot Mikdashi Betocham Leolam.
Yasher Koach, beautifully read.
Thank you.
Beautifully
Bruce,
chanted. By the way, I noticed another Hema in verse 27. So clearly Hema is another form of Hem. And we'll have to ask one of the rabbis to explain the difference between Hem and Hema there.
Yes.
But that's all for this week. We wish everybody a Shabbat Shalom, and we hope to see you all next week.